Okay, so another way in which you can get different kinds of consequentialism is how you decide on how to weigh out the good consequences and the bad consequences. Now, in most versions of consequentialism, what you need to do is add up the good consequences and then subtract away the bad consequences and see which one outweighs the other, and then act on the consequence in which the good consequences outweigh the bad ones. Now, notice this doesn't always translate into helping the greater number of people, kind of leaving a minority in the dust. Sometimes it can work out this way. So, for example, if you think of this scenario that's in Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov, suppose that by torturing this one person, you could cause a little greater happiness for lots of other people. In our case, 4 other people. Well, the sort of utilitarian consequentialist that we read about last week would say, look, what you've got to do is add up all the good consequences and then subtract the bad consequences. And if the good consequences are still more than the bad ones, then that's the one to go with. So if you see here, let's imagine the person that we're torturing, well, they get like negative 30 well-being points. It causes them negative 30 amount of good consequences. And each person, each of the other people, they get about 10, points of good consequences, well-being, however you want to measure that. Well, so if we add that all up, in total, we've got 40 points of well-being and on the one hand, and 30 points of not well-being on the other hand. So altogether, we've got a net of 10 points of well-being. So the consequentialist in this case would say, yep, what we're morally obligated to do is torture this one person in order to give everyone else a little boost in their happiness, because the overall boost in happiness outweighs the tremendous pain that we're putting this one person through. But notice, even if you take this kind of utilitarian calculation and you just add up all the good stuff and subtract the bad stuff, that doesn't always mean you're always benefiting the many at the expense of the few. It can go the other way around. So suppose that you have this one guy. Sometimes philosophers call such folks utility monsters because they just get extreme pleasure, immense utility out of the suffering of other people. So in this case, let's imagine that if we allow this one utility monster over on the left here to say, torture these other 4 folks, they're just going to get tremendous pleasure out of torturing these people. And, well, each of these individual people are, of course, going to suffer a fair bit. Maybe not, like, all that much. Maybe it's kind of, torture light. But still, like, their well-being is going to go down from what it would have been otherwise. Well, the utilitarian consequentialist says, look, we've got to add up all of the negative well-being and add up the positive well-being and see which is highest. So this one guy gets like 60 points of pleasure out of torturing these 4 other people, and each one of these 4 other people gets around like negative 5 well-being points for the suffering that they endure. So in total, we've got like 5, 10, 15, 20, like negative 20 points. Well, that gets massively outweighed by the positive 60 points that the guy over on the left has. So in this case, we'd say, oh yeah, morally, what we ought to do is let this guy torture these 4 other people because, whoa, he's going to get way more of a boost in well-being total than these other 4 people. So there you're benefiting one person at the expense of the many. Now, both of these situations, you might think like, ugh, gosh, that doesn't seem right. And a consequentialist can try and futz around with how to do the math here. So some consequentialists say, well, no, you shouldn't just take all of the bad consequences and add them up, and all the good consequences and add them up, and then weigh them against one another. You should somehow take into account the number of people that are benefiting or suffering as the result of certain actions. But then things become kind of a complicated math problem about how to weigh out the amount of suffering or well-being that any one individual gets boosted versus how that's distributed across everyone generally. It gets complicated and tough. So that's partly why in this reading we read this week, we just focused on this really narrow utilitarian version, which says, look, the way to add this stuff up is to just add up all the bad consequences, add up all the good consequences, see which one comes up on top, and then act so that the net good consequences are maximized. You've got the most good consequence once you subtract away all the bad consequences.